Well, good morning, everybody. To start off another week here, I just want to first of all say I hope you all had a good Mother's Day weekend. We spent some of our time over here in Springfield, Illinois. It's about 80 miles from Champaign, and I have family here in Springfield, so does my wife. But it was amazing when we got here. Springfield has already had the cicada hatch, and so I couldn't believe just the sheer number of cicadas there. Well, we have none in Champaign so far, so we're kind of waiting on when this is going to take place. But the other things that were of quite importance over the weekend in the evolution of this pattern are these things. That upper level low that sat here has moved out early this morning. It's what's responsible for all this cloud cover and some of the rain that's coming through. And then take a look at the complex of storms this morning moving out of Louisiana into parts of Mississippi. We're concerned this week about flooding and severe weather across the south, and the rain delays that are going to be happening because of the storm systems that kind of go back on repeat in the midsection of the country. There's two other things I want you to see as the sun's rising this morning. Look at the dense fog and low-level cloud that's in this part of the northeast. If I kind of rock back and forth and you're looking at this full screen, you can see the outlines of some of the valleys. But I want to leave it on this larger view and just take you back to yesterday when we had the Canadian wildfire smoke sinking through the northern tier of the United States. This was a kind of a 3-day event, just moving farther and farther south each day, and this really degraded the air quality in these areas. Okay, if we look back, let's get an update on this. There we go, 6 a.m. update. If we look back here over the last 3 days at total accumulated precipitation, we had one system exit. We had another one that formed over parts of Arizona. That's that cutoff low. And as it slowly moved out, look at the rainfall we were able to get parts of the high and western plains, getting almost, back into New Mexico. Not almost, but into New Mexico, past the Cap Rock, where storms had kind of had a difficult time making it. But as I look at this, I'm thinking a lot about just the extremely heavy rain that has been in eastern Texas lately and the flooding that it's caused there. And we're going to take a closer look at that in a few moments. Just thinking overall about precipitation, though, this is the last week. And as you look at it, heavy rains in parts of Montana. That's from that low that just sat up here and just spun for several days, kicking off all of the severe weather to the south, the heavy rains that moved across the Tennessee Valley, the heavy rains that sunk here into the southern United States. And if you just take it back to the beginning of the month, these are the precipitation ranks. And when I pulled up this map this morning, it got me really thinking about one thing, and I want to share this with you. So I kind of wrote some new code this morning to do a different style of analysis of something I tried a while ago. Because when you take a look at where the heaviest precipitation has been in this month so far, I'm thinking a lot about parts of Montana coming over to Iowa, parts of the southeast, and of course this climate reporting district here in eastern Texas, just as looking at some very, very wet spots. And the same thing for parts of Oregon and California as well. But what I want to show you is this next kind of sequence of maps. So newest map looking at 30-day percent of normal. And again, I keep stressing this, but we have this spot in Texas that, again, this only goes through Sunday morning, yesterday. It's got a 1-day lag for quality control. We are looking at over 1,000% of normal precipitation in the last 30 days. We've seen better moisture try to work its way into these dry parts of Texas and Oklahoma and Colorado and Kansas over the weekend. We have wet, very wet weather that's coming through here to help knock this out, and the East Coast is looking wet, which means we're going to start to break this down as well. And that's really just going to leave pockets of the Southwest and the Columbia Basin and parts of Idaho on the drier side of average. Now, just to show you what's going on down here, I went out and picked up a location. This is Huntsville, Texas, so we're north of Houston. And when you add up this year's precipitation up until this point, we're currently at 290% of average. That's what you've got over here. But what I want to stress is they've already, as of May the 13th, this morning, hit their climatological average for the year. So just to stress how incredibly wet parts of Texas have been, they've had a year's worth of precipitation in the first 5 months of the year. So I want to make sure we can see that. And of course, that's why we continue to see the rivers in flood stage down here. We have a flood watch. That's the shading in the background here that stretches from this part of Texas all the way over to the Florida Panhandle and western Georgia this morning. But take a look up the Mississippi River. Several of its tributaries are in flood stage as well. Now, this is where we start to just think through some of these bigger picture things, because watching the flood risk continue here and the air quality issues farther to the north and the risk of a frost right up here in this part of North Dakota, I want to be thinking a lot about the water aspect of this. And so I made this morning. I made this once a while ago, but I rewrote the code this morning because I wanted to get just a better view of it. What it is it's January 1 of 2020 through January 1 of 2024. And last time I showed this map, there was a few things we pointed out, like the excess of precipitation that's been over the southeast when you add up all of those years together. So see what we're doing? We're adding up every day during this 4-day stretch and comparing it to average. And this is a departure from average map. I stressed about the drought that over time has stretched from parts of the southern plains into the western Corn Belt. And there are still, when you drill down to it, a few of these darkest shades in Iowa are places that are nearly 40 inches off of average. That's more than a year's worth of rainfall that's been missed over the 4 years. And in the West, even though the last 2 years have been extremely wet in the West, the previous 2 years were very, very dry. And that's why we have the contrast here, and the dryness has overall won out on the deficits. Now, the reason why I brought this up is because over the weekend, I received several emails, even a couple of text messages from farmers in Iowa. And the question was, when are we going to shut this off? Can we turn the rain off? Because still, the 4-year deficit, look, this is now including up to May 11th. So this was the previous map, and this is now up to May 11th. And while we've had just a small dent made in the longer term dryness, it's important to stress that this is not how the atmosphere or even the soil accounts for moisture. So I got asked to make this map because they wanted to know what the deficits look like over a 4-year stretch. But because of the speed at which the hydrologic cycle operates, it's not as though the atmosphere or the soil even has a memory back to 4 years in this part of the world. Now, that's not true in other parts of the world, but in this part of the world, here in the Midwest, it isn't. And so what's important to see here is that the recent moisture that's gotten in has reset things. And we can't be looking back way, way, way in the past as a way to account for what's currently happening now. And I want to make that case for you. First of all, take a look at our newest drought monitor. The drought monitor is designed to capture kind of the full length of the hydrologic cycle. And that's why it tends to move on 6 months, not 4 years. And what we've seen in the latest drought monitor is a pretty remarkable change in our U.S. drought picture. Now remember, there's a few great things I want you to do on this website. For example, you can go to Maps, come down here to Change Maps, and then you can select the time period over which you want to see the changes. So just in the last week, everywhere that you see this shading, it represents a 1-class improvement. If I just take this out of the last, 3 weeks, which has been where we've seen this really active pattern coming in, we saw the degradation of drought here, which is what makes those weekend rains so important. But we've seen up to a 2-class improvement across this section of the western Corn Belt. We've been getting a bit drier in places over in the southeast, moving up toward the mid-Atlantic region. Parts of Florida are going drier as well. The other thing I want to make sure that you do with this, actually 2 other things. If you have a moment this morning, come over to the Data tab and click on Time Series. It'll take you to a national time series first, but you can change the area, whatever you want to do, and it gives you from the year 2000 till present. What I want to do is hover at the very end of this to show you that on the newest drought monitor, we're now down to 15% of the land area in the lower 48 in some form of drought from stage D1 to D4. So that does not include the abnormally dry category. If you include that, it's about a third of the country in some form of drought. The last thing to do is this. Click on Ag and Drought. And when this opens up the new spot, you have a lot of options here, but I'm going to pick on row crops today. And as you click on that icon, you can even see each of the different crops in the area affected, percent area affected. So I live in the heart of the Corn Belt. So I just think, hey, the Corn Belt's got 14% of its area in drought. And it's just a way by which to assess kind of the overall state of things. But I made this point, let's go back to it here, that when you think about the longer term accounting of moisture, it doesn't truly reflect what's going on in the now. And the now is really seen here. This is our latest root zone down to 100 centimeters or 40-inch soil moisture. And what you want to be is you want to be somewhere in the 30 to 70% range historically. So we can easily identify those places that have been exceptionally wet as of late, the places that still need more moisture as of late. And we're going to watch to see if this upcoming forecast can change this around with any kind of respect at all. But that's kind of the narrative that I wanted to build by writing the code to make those maps this morning so you could see this. All right, so what do we do with it? I also thought it'd be important to stress this point in California. You remember, if we go back to this map, California, doesn't matter which one we look at, we see significantly large deficits here, well past 40 inches in total accumulated precipitation over a 4-year stretch. But what's important about that is just to look at, way ahead of myself here, there we go, is to look at this. You see these 3 years, if you look in here, this is 1, 2, 3 years back to back to back where it was incredibly dry out west. And the last 2 winters have been here. It's just to say that these 2 have not offset the deficits of those. So this kind of precipitation volatility is important, and it's always important to look at longer-term trends. But just be careful of thinking about drought as being something that can't be undone, especially if you live in the Midwest, in a single season. Now, the problem is, and this is what the questions were from some of the growers I was talking to over the weekend, when are the windows going to open? Because that drive I made back and forth to Springfield this weekend, we didn't get back till late last night. And I probably saw the headlights of at least 40 planters rolling on I-72, just trying to get ahead of the wet weather. And that wet weather is primarily coming from this. You see, our jet stream is still quite active in the North Pacific and not blocked. So is our subtropical jet. And this is the wave that lived over Arizona this weekend that's moving out across parts of the Midwest. The severe weather is going to be to the south of it. The big ridge that built into the west over the weekend is gone, and we can already start to see the flow coming off the North Pacific that's going to reinvigorate the pattern back to where we were. And that's one of the things I'm trying to stress and understand, because from April 21st through May the 10th, I made this comment, but this was the most dominant feature, in my opinion, of the flow. It accelerated the jet stream here, dipped it into the west. There was kind of weak but more frequent ridging that was over the East Coast, and the flow just came into that characteristic check mark. You hear me say that hundreds of times, but it kept doing that. And we asked all week last week, are the models serious about putting a ridge in the west and leaving it? And on Monday, we had confidence. By Tuesday, it was gone. And now we're getting into this time period where we want to know if we're going to go back to this to finish this month of May. And the whole reason behind this narrative is to understand if we're actually going to open a planting window where folks are not out dragging their planters through at 2 a.m. trying to get stuff finished. So with all of that being said, let's see what this pattern did to us. Currently looking at tornado reports across the United States, we are well above our average. We're actually closer to the numbers we should be at the very end of May, but as of May 11th, 746 tornado reports, 608 would be the average. Hail reports caught back up to normal. As you can see, we're sitting right about 100% of normal. Wind reports is still well above, 3,500 versus 2,500, so we're 1,000 more than average on the severe wind reports. We've had a short break in severe weather. Questions are we going to go back to it? And I know it's not been very short if you're down in Louisiana this morning where the storms are rolling through. So here's this whole narrative coming together. This is the wave that left Arizona that's moving across the Midwest. What we're going to see is the ridge that was over the west, where does it move to? So through Tuesday into Wednesday, as that wave just slowly sneaks across the Mid-South, we'll see how much precipitation from it in a second. I'm just looking for any sign of a pattern shift. And what I've got here is going into the weekend, a trough that sneaks down. We have a cutoff low here, so the flow is doing something like this. And what this does is this keeps the weather unsettled in the midsection of the country. If we're putting ridges back out in the Pacific, the flow will dip in through here, and there it goes. Here it is coming out of the southwest, just like that. So a question about this pattern is how much wetter is it going to get before we start to get drier? Because just 10 days from now, on the 22nd, okay, the ridge is back here again, flow's coming over the top, it dips down, and there we go again. And the University of Illinois has a great class. It's called Field Studies of Convection. It's run by my close friend and outstanding professor. His name's Professor Jeff Frame. And they just left on a 2-week journey to take students out to observe severe convection on the plains. It's a class. You can get credit at the University of Illinois for storm chasing. It was a class that Jeff created back when I was a professor there. And I bet he's happy as can be that there's a trough here. All right, so with that all being stated, let's get into this. A quick look at the radar here, starting at midnight last night, rolling through early this morning. There's our upper level low. There's our front clearing parts of Ontario into Quebec. We have another one following it coming out of parts of southern Saskatchewan. The heaviest rains are down here to the south, and that is, of course, where we have our biggest storms this morning. So we saw these earlier coming out of Louisiana to Mississippi and Arkansas. A lot of lightning early this morning in these storms down here across the south, including some stronger storms going through parts of Oklahoma. Today, the Storm Prediction Center's got a broad area from eastern Texas all the way to the Panhandle, where they've upgraded to an enhanced risk. As we slide into tomorrow, it's going to primarily be in the southeast. This would be Tuesday. And on Wednesday, we're going to watch again for the southern plains to have the risk of strong storms, and the same thing for the southeast. So to get in and see it with one of our high-res models, let's pick this up this morning with a high-res NAM. We're going to watch complexes of storms roll. I mean, just all day down here across the south. The upper level low is still sitting and spinning here, bringing scattered showers and some storms into parts of the Midwest. Although there's not the risk at this point this morning as I was looking at it for severe storms in here, but we could hear some thunder with some of these. And that just continues to roll east, such that by mid-morning tomorrow on Tuesday, that low basically came out of Kansas and now sits over southern Illinois. There's a weaker system to the north here, as you can see, coming through. As we play this out through Tuesday, getting into Wednesday, this is Wednesday morning. Wednesday, getting toward the midday, we have another low that's sneaking right through the Red River Valley, bringing some scattered precip here as one exits. That's just here in the first 3 days of this week. If we look out there longer term, this would be the next 7 days according to the artificial intelligence forecast model. And if I look at it and say what was the bigger differences over where this was saying last week versus this week, we've increased precipitation totals kind of in this corridor, right in through here. This had been projected wetter, this had been projected with flooding, and we've been projecting wet up the East Coast. So let's go with our 5 model comparison here. This is the WPC forecast for the next 7 days. Take a look at Kansas, Missouri, and Illinois. This has been an area that's seen an increase in precipitation. If there's going to be some place that maybe has a better chance at getting less precipitation, I don't know if that's the way to say it, but I think it's going to be this part of the Western Corn Belt getting into the northern plains. Very wet across the Gulf Coast, and of course a lot of that coming from storms today. This is the national blend of models, 7-day forecast. This is the European model, 7-day forecast. And this is the GFS, 7-day. And when you put it all together and look at probabilities, our next 7 days chance of getting an inch of rain pretty well defined here as easily picking out those really wet areas. So from the central part of Kansas all the way over to the Appalachian Mountains, and then starting in eastern Texas, rolling all the way to the southeast, these 2 corridors have our wettest conditions. But this is not to skip what's going on in the Canadian Prairie, which is fantastic to see this early season rain in this area, and quite wet conditions possible right here coming out of Saskatchewan into Manitoba and the northern parts of North Dakota. Who's going to be drier? We'll probably get a new model run in here. Yeah, there's the new model run. Let's go back and give you that 0Z so we can look out there. I'm going to take it out 10 days in this case. Overall, the west, which is going into its seasonal dryness, is showing up here, but the pattern is not really slowing down to give those folks that have been so wet lately much of an extended break. So this was a miss. If you remember back at the very beginning of May, my narrative was, hey, I think something's going to change up by the time we get into mid-May. But I said the failure point would be if the Western Ridge doesn't establish itself. We found that failure mode, and sure enough, it went toward it. Okay, let's do a little bit of model comparison, GFS versus the European. GFS is on the left. We've already taken a look at the first 2 lows exiting, the one that's bringing the severe weather to the south, the one that's going to roll through the Midwest and get its way here by the time we get into midweek off the East Coast. And here's the front that follows it, giving us that other shot of rain coming through the Midwest here down into the southern plains on Thursday. Now behind this, what we're going to keep an eye out on is this. There is still subtropical jet stream flow. So notice through the end of the week, we're still watching storms here as a front clears the eastern Corn Belt and heads toward the northeast. We see another low. Again, remember how that flow looked earlier, coming in on troughs like this that were trying to deepen in the midsection of the country? Well, you can see that low coming right in through here and curling its way up across the U.S.-Canada border by this weekend. Possibly more storms and showers down here across the south. But there's not a whole lot about this pattern that says slowing down, does it? I mean, just watch it all. You don't see any large blocking features just shutting this down over the next 7 to 10 days. It doesn't mean there won't be windows of opportunity, but they're going to be tight, and we're going to have to be prepared and ready to go as soon as we can. Because the week 2 forecasts have adjusted as well. Remember last week when we kept looking at the European saying, it had drier conditions building into this area? But the CPC and the GFS really didn't. I don't think the GFS saw the pattern perfectly, but it didn't predict dry. I have to tip my cap to the GFS and the CPC for seeing the pattern for what it was while the European was trying to break it down. So we need to remember that going forward, that the European had been too quick to jump to a pattern change. That's just something to kind of lock away and think about for the next time it does it. So we called into better question. But these three maps represent your your week 2, so day 8 through 14 precipitation forecast compared to average. So from there, let's go ahead and have a look at the temperature side of this. That's my frost potential map over the next 7 days. And please, if you are here, do not freak out. There was a data dropout this morning, so the National Digital Forecast Database had some data issues in this area. So no, don't worry about a frost in this area. I looked at the minimum temperatures, not a risk. Overall, though, high temperatures look something like this. Here's your high temperatures today on Monday. Let's play this forward to Tuesday and Wednesday. So the low is leaving. There's cooler air behind it, getting hot in the west, but it just doesn't last. There's Thursday into Friday, already getting some cooler air coming in the northwest. Here we get into this weekend. There's Saturday. Look, we're back down in the mid to upper 80s, going toward triple digit down south, but that's not uncommon. That's only just a few degrees above average down here. Take a look at Montana. Your wild ride continues. So you know Montana, what you've been through. 50, 60 degree swings in temperature in a single week, and you can already see the changes, coming through here again. So where we're taking this from here is to go look at the day 5 through 10 forecast, which is shown here from the GFS. And here's the day 10 through 15. And we do overall have some cooler air coming in, largely due to just the presence of a trough. But this is no crazy late frost outlook. And it is in agreement with what the European model has. That's day 5 through 10, and this is sliding out there day 10 through 15. So there's a little bit of cooler air that's sneaking through, preventing some early season excessive heat rolling in the midsection here of the country. Where we're going from here, I'm starting to get a signal from the MJO, but I've been reluctant to talk about this because if the MJO does pop back out into phase 4, and it does it here in the next, let's call it 4 or 5 days, then that would lend itself back to, look, there's that ridge again. Flow coming over the top, trough, southeastern weak ridging, flow comes right in the middle. And you know what that pattern delivers. I wonder if the models are seeing that and trying to just carry it on out and do something with it. And maybe that's why we start to see this forecast here for the end of May and start of June from the CPC. They released this on Friday. They're still considering that the end of this month has a lot of severe weather in the Central Plains overall from this particular pattern. The CPC did really well, I think, recently. So I'm going to give them a lot of credit as I look forward to this forecast. But it is certainly out of whack with what the European model is saying. Now, this is going out a bit farther. So the CPC forecast just took you through the first week of June. This one's going to take you out to the solstice. And as we look at it, the new forecast from the European model keeps a larger area in through here quite wet that in previous runs it didn't have. I think this model has a pretty significant initialization bias, and it's leading us to see things I think that don't really manifest themselves. I honestly do not feel as though I can live outside of a 10-day forecast right now. Given the burn we had from the models on picking up on the pattern change, the European model's just continuance of taking a pattern it's got and never letting it go, and I think this is the way it is. Now, I will still look out there and show you these longer term things, but I'm so confused by the model's, persistence of putting higher pressure closer to the West Coast, and then the last minute getting rid of it. And that's what lets things dip, the pressure drop, and the precipitation continue to roll through. It's not 2019, but it's certainly not the slowdown and the opening up to some warm conditions to get this crop to fire out of the ground in the midsection of the country, to stop the flooding in Texas into parts of the southeast, and to stop getting the cooler air sneaking in at times in the northern plains. We're not breaking away from that, but we're certainly not seeing the big pattern flips which were possible to see this time of year. Now, to finish this up, I want to give you an animation starting in February, rolling through March, and now into the month of April, and eventually the beginning of May, right here. And these are the ocean temperatures. Now, we've talked a lot about how La Nina is pushing its way toward us, right? I'm not expecting a massive one at this point, but we're going to move probably toward weak La Nina by mid to late summer. Watch north of Hawaii. In April, watch how warm this gets, where the ridge sat. I make a stink about this every week. Does that keep pushing its way toward British Columbia? And the reason I do that, the reason why I think about that so much is because of something called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It's kind of on a 5-year and 5-year pattern. So you tend to go positive for 3, 4, 5 years, and then it tends to go negative. And we were expecting the PDO to make the turn. But if you take a look, April's data dropped it back off again. And that kind of variability happens. But if it continues, let's say we've missed this, and the PDO continues to go down with time. And again, what is the PDO? The PDO is when, if you're looking at ocean temperatures, there's cooler water here and warmer water nosing in. If that warmer water stays here and this all stays cool, where I'm putting these C's, then that would give you a pattern for this upcoming summer that looks like this in terms of precipitation. Everywhere where it's red is drier. The warmer colors represent a positive correlation. We have a negative PDO right now, which means if it gets more negative, red colors mean drier. I made the case last week that I don't think this is what's going to happen. I made the case that there seems to be evidence that the warmer water, which you're going to watch form right in through here, there it is, into March, into April, is going to keep pushing its way through all of this. And if it does, here it is, come see that warm water? If it keeps pushing its way into this area, then this doesn't happen. The heat comes into this area, storms roll over the periphery, and we get into a hot and stormy summer here, and these storms cascade all the way to the East Coast. That was the case we built on Friday. So I'll watch it. We're going to get new long-range updates from our last 2 models at the end of this week. We're going to stitch them all together and put it into one narrative so you can see what we're thinking, and then we'll just go again week by week and have a look at this. To finish this up today, I want to give you a quick international update on temperatures. We're still quite cold in parts of Russia, not nearly as cold as it was, but still cold. There's a frost advancing out of the south, hitting Buenos Aires and Cordoba. There's cold air coming up here. And if you just look around the rest of the world, you kind of get this perspective on temperatures. Precipitation-wise, we've now gone a bit drier over in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. This is why the MJO is currently coming out of phase into phase 3 toward phase 4. See all the convection here? Very wet in southern India. Rains are trying to get back to where they've already been flooding out south of the Yangtze. And the whole of the Russian wheat belt just went drier again in the forecast, while much of Western Europe stayed wetter. It is still extremely wet in southern Brazil, like Rio Grande do Sul. Some of it's getting over into parts of northern Argentina as well. But the monsoon is done for the rest of Brazil's Safrina area. We've talked about that now this will be starting week 4 with that discussion. So just kind of keeping an eye on these things for you. I'll build the narrative throughout the week. We'll talk again on Tuesday morning. Until then, you all have a great day. Appreciate it. Thank you.